Yeah, Brad, you can go ahead whenever you like.
Perfect. Will do. Let me just get the screen share set up for us. All right. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Great. So we'll be given a quick intro to business analysis today. It's a broad field, but we'll do our best to give a high-level overview. So we'll start out with the purpose of a business analyst. Basically, in the many different types of roles or the many different types of business analysts you will come across, they all have a shared purpose. The main thing that they do first, the foundation of all of their work, is understanding the need. And so they need to come in with curiosity and understand. Sometimes it's understanding the end user, sometimes it's understanding the business itself, and sometimes it's both. It's pulling those two things together. But the basis of all the work they're going to do is having a clear understanding of the why behind what they're working on. So to understand the why, they can be analyzing data, they can be conducting interviews and research, industry trends, and they want to make sure that they have a comprehensive understanding of what they're going to be working on. So they need good context. If it is more traditional business analysis work, they need to understand competitors, they need to understand market advantage and ways to set the business ahead. If it's for the end user, they need to understand pain points. But everything, when there's a new request, a new problem to solve with technology, then the business analyst needs to be well connected to the purpose behind it. The next thing they do is they need to communicate well. I would say the primary role of business analyst is to be a good communicator. They need to help people understand the why, and they need to function as a translator. So business analyst is stretched in the business. They need to be in touch with what the business stakeholders are looking for and speak their language. And they need to be in touch with what the developers are needing. So they need to be able to speak in a technical way. And they need to tune what they are communicating to and adapt to their audience. So they need to be clear, concise, and give actionable user stories and technical specs the development team can understand and implement. And so once they've done the understanding the need and they have communicated clearly, and part of that communication is also validating that they understood the need with the business stakeholders or whoever's providing requirements, then they can go and work on the solution piece. And so this involves communication with developers, brainstorming the solution. Oftentimes I talk about the business analyst role is to define the what and not the how. And so a business analyst, you understand the why first, that gives you the context, and then the analyze and communicate is ensuring that you have all the details around the what. The what of the request, what's going to be built, what is it going to do, what are the functionalities that's expected. And then we leave it up to the developers to be the ones that actually figure out the how. And this would be, what technologies are we going to use to meet the solution? How should it be developed? What technical capabilities need to exist? And so we lean on other experts and SMEs to come up with those solutions. The business analysts can present requirements in a way that they may have a solution in mind. And so we'll talk about how to write good requirements, but we want to lean on others. And ultimately our goal is to ensure that the solutions meet the needs and deliver the value connected back to that why that we first made sure that we understood well. And occasionally the BAs will be involved after the solution is implemented to help with user training and change management. So that is the basic purpose of a business analyst. Any questions before I continue? All right. So now we'll go through the process that a business analyst follows. Early on in any effort, and often the upstream of what a business analyst receives is some sort of request. Could be from the users, it could be an idea for the product, it could be something that the product owner or product manager has prioritized and says, this is what we need to build. So a business analyst often is going to receive just the direction without very much detail. Hey, we want to build this feature, go figure out how and get it built. So early on is gathering requirements. This is connected to the understanding the why that we just talked about. And it's going a step further. It's not just the purpose, but it's defining how it'll work. And when I say how it'll work, keeping in mind that we're talking at a functional level, not a technical level. Typically, we'll rely on SMEs for the technical design. So we'll define specific requirements, how everything needs to work. And an important part of this that we'll get into later is the measurement of success, or we'll talk about acceptance criteria. The next step, once we've understood what the need is and gathered requirements, is analyze and document. You'll also hear me talk about a business analyst in some ways as a glorified secretary. They get to do a lot of creative things and more fun things, but it's not without documentation. And a good business analyst has comprehensive and detailed documentation and is very organized. So after you've understood those requirements, you want to make sure that you clearly and concisely document them with enough detail to enable development and implementation. So your developers, while there will be verbal communication with them, you should have enough detail written down that someone that's not familiar with the project could understand what needs to be built. And we'll talk about the different types of documentation as well, but here are a couple of examples. User stories in an Agile context, flowcharts, data models, and other formats can all help to document what is needed and what's going to be built. Next step would be refine and validate. So we want to continuously review and refine our requirements with the stakeholders through workshops, demos, or user story reviews to make sure that the solution we are building and we're documenting actually aligns with what their objectives are and their purpose. And DAs also work closely with UX designers to make sure that they've got a good UX solution and input on whatever their requirements are. So continue to gather feedback and ensure requirements and acceptance criteria are well understood and meet stakeholder needs. Next, once you have that documented and everything is signed off, this is exactly what we're going to build and people understand it and agree with it, then we go into the design and development phase. So this involves working with technical teams to design a solution that meets the requirements. And this is where you involve the technical team. So they're thinking about architecture and data models, how the data is connected, how we're going to support that solution. And this is a good time to identify dependencies and risks and other constraints. You want to try to involve technical resources early on in this process so that you don't get way down the road of a pie in the sky idea and then find out it's not feasible. So then with your developers, you can establish estimates and move forward with prioritizing the work. And finally, is the last step here would be the implementation. So you want to ensure smooth and successful delivery. And that involves working with developers as they're in development to ensure that their questions are met and supporting the QA and testing team, because oftentimes questions will come up. If you've done a good job during the design and development phase, then things will be mostly clear. You will have already thought through a lot of the questions that are likely to come up, but inevitably there's going to be some question that you didn't think of, and you want to be available to that dev team and support them throughout the process. So part of implementation is testing and validating that the solution meets the acceptance criteria, and we'll get into what acceptance criteria is and how to write that well. But this is how you measure success and make sure that what was delivered met the requirements. And then oftentimes, and especially in a waterfall context, there will be a support period after implementation where you'll need to take feedback and make sure that the new solution is implemented well and everyone is using it effectively. Okay, so business analyst, I mentioned, is a broad field. Depending on who you ask, you're going to get a lot of different definitions of what it means. So I put together a couple axes here to separate it into quadrants, the types of work that you might do as a business analyst. So on the left, we have operations, and this would be more like maintain the status quo, do the daily ongoing work of a business. And on the right side, I have transformation. And this would be major change, not the normal day-to-day work, but this is pushing out some significant different process or different system. And then on the top, we have business focused business analysts, where it's more working with the stakeholders that are connected to the business's revenue generating side. They're connected to what the business actually does in the marketplace that makes them competitive. And so business analysts sometimes work in that context. And on the technology side, this is more like the solution piece. And so these business analysts are directly connected to technology and implementing technical solutions. So we'll move our way around and talk about the details. So in business support roles, these are BAs that are looking across the industry. They're looking at market trends and they're looking at operational data to try to figure out where the business can gain competitive advantage. They are probably preparing reports and helping support decision making for high level leadership. And some of the goals of this would be improved processes for business operations. This would be like ongoing process improvement and mitigating risk if there's a big decision that needs to be made or a project to be implemented. Going to be identifying those up front, reducing costs or increasing efficiency and productivity. And notice these are process related, but they're not what's over on the right side, the process improvement, which I'm thinking about more as a major transformation. So there's the ongoing operational process improvement, which should always be going on. And then as we shift to the second quadrant here, we're talking about a type of process improvement that's an overhaul of what's been going on. So this would be if there's a major organizational change, say we're going to shift from a waterfall methodology to Agile across the whole organization. Or we're going to shift the structure of the departments in the company, and so the roles of a lot of people are going to change. That would be a process improvement type of role. And so these VAs are focused obviously on communication, and there's a change management piece to these where you need to anticipate the needs and challenges that are going to come up as you implement the new process. And in order to do effective process improvement, you need to think through the current state, the future state, what the gaps will be, and communicate all those things in a logical order, which would involve preparing documentation for training and often involves gaining buy-in because not everyone likes change. And so you want to make sure that you've taken the appropriate steps to make sure that people will adopt the new process. The next piece is software development and support. So this is at that intersection of operations and kind of the ongoing needs and technology. And this is where I personally work now. I have actually worked in all of these spaces, but my current role is in software development and support area. And so these BAs work as a bridge between business stakeholders and developers. And there's usually a focus on a particular product. It could be an app or website. And so they gather the requirements, they define the user stories, or it could be technical specifications, business requirements, if it's more of a waterfall environment. And so then they will ensure the developers have a clear understanding of what needs to be built and that the final product meets the needs of the business or end users. And so in this case, BAs are a bridge between business and technology, and they're a critical piece. The last one here is systems implementation in a transformation sense. So these would be more in the category of a business consultant or a business analyst that is supporting a major new system overhaul. So no longer business as usual, just making upgrades and enhancements to a system. That would be on the software development and support side. This is talking about we're ripping out a system that's been the backbone for our company for 20 years, and we're going to an entirely new system. And sometimes you'll see system integrators in this type of role as well. The business analyst here would be involved in identifying the gaps and communicating risks, and then helping to configure the new software system to fit the business needs. And so the business analyst needs to, again, bridge the gap, but this time they are responsible for understanding the old or the current state, the way the business is working. So in a way, they're an expert on the business, and they need to learn both the old software, which they probably already are familiar with, and the new software. And they'll be involved in helping configure it to meet the needs of the business. All right, so that is a good overview of the types of roles you'll see out there for a business analyst. Does anybody have questions about the different types of roles or anything we talked about so far? All right, I will continue. So here's just a quick summary of the methodologies and ways of working that you may encounter. There's actually a bunch more than what's displayed here, but this is some of the common ones. So just an overview, Waterfall, for anyone that's not familiar, is a step-by-step process, and you can see that if you map it out over time, it actually looks like a waterfall cascading down. And so this would be defining one phase, maybe a requirements phase first, and for the entire project, spending this time, maybe 6 weeks in this example, just to define requirements. And so you're doing all the necessary due diligence to understand all the details of what needs to be built. And then you would go on to the next step. Sometimes there is some overlap in these phases, but either way, they are sequential. And you have to complete this before you complete this, before you complete this. And this has been the way that work was done for a long time. Agile is a relatively new methodology or framework, but there are a lot of, while there are some benefits and sometimes it's necessary to work in a waterfall context, it also has a lot of drawbacks. This tends to be a world where it's stressful with deadlines and lots of reports and updates, and it's difficult to be accurate with what a budget or a timeline is going to be to implement something because there's just so many unknowns. I'm going to jump to Agile first, and then we'll come back to Kanban. So Agile is a framework that acknowledges some of those challenges in the waterfall context and says we're not going to try to plan everything up front. We're going to build just the first thing that's needed, just the highest priority thing. And we're going to implement it so we can add some value as soon as possible to the user and get feedback on it. And then we're going to figure out what the next priority is at that time and go and build that. And so Agile is a realistic and sustainable way to do work. It says we have a set capacity. We can't tell you how long it's going to take to build something, but we can tell you that we're going to build the highest priority thing, and we're going to build it efficiently with the capacity that we do have. Kanban is a way of working that instead of using sprints like you do in Scrum, it doesn't have a set time box that things are going to be delivered inside of, but it tries to improve the process of delivering value. And so you want to minimize what is in progress, and you can see that demonstrated here. We've got a backlog of things to do. We've got only one thing that's in progress. Sometimes it may be several, but you want to minimize this because as Agile recognizes, it's more valuable to have things done than to have things in progress. And so you want to get one thing done rather than having 5 things you're working on. Okay. And I wanted to cover these because these affect the environment you're in and the methodology that's being practiced affects the type of work you do as a business analyst. So it can be helpful to understand what good looks like. What is your target as a business analyst? So these are some of the things that you're striving for if you're a business analyst in a company. You don't just want to identify the problem. A good business analyst will challenge assumptions and leverage data to work towards creative solutions. And so this involves understanding the user needs and fostering a culture of innovation. And you want to be effective at both understanding the problem fully and implementing creative ideas. The next thing is good BAs have strong domain expertise, and this means you understand the industry you operate in and the things that are unique about it. And you tailor your solution to consider specific regulations, limitations, or market opportunities that would apply to the domain you operate in. Communication excellence. This is one of the primary pieces of what a BA does. And so you need to both be able to explain technical concepts in plain language and be able to take plain language and break that down into the technical solution. And so as you're in the profession for longer, you get used to being able to think about your audience and what level of information you need to communicate. It's a challenge initially when your head has been in the weeds and you understand all the details about how a solution is going to work to zoom out and communicate to an executive the why in just a couple sentences of what you're building and the value that it's going to deliver. And when you're in a business context, sitting with a table of stakeholders that are dreaming about what could be, you need to be translating that in your head and ultimately to your dev team of what that means technically, what it's going to take to implement that, what technology exists or will need to exist for it. And so that's the back and forth, and you'll be pulled in both directions as a BA. All right, so that's the communication piece, and this does involve documentation and staying organized. And the last one here is leadership and autonomy. So early on, a junior BA is probably going to be handed little pieces of projects and will be given an assignment of what to go and gather requirements for and come back and deliver. As you move forward in your career, you will be hopefully more autonomous and you'll actually be leading efforts. So you won't have as much clear direction handed to you. It'll be more of this high level direction or request or idea from leadership. And it may even be fully autonomous. It may be on you to figure out what is the highest value thing for you to go do. And then you're expected to go and deliver that value. And as BAs grow, it can also be helpful to mentor other BAs to help them develop and influence in their organization. And so as you are a trusted voice of helping BAs work effectively, that can also help your career grow. All right, so a couple core competencies. This is going to be basically a breakdown of some categories of skills that a BA should have to be successful. So Agile development, not every company has moved toward Agile, and I don't think all will, but it is a growing methodology and a popular one. And certainly in a job interview, you want to be familiar with this. I can almost guarantee that in a job interview for a business analyst role, you will be asked what Agile is or you know the difference between Waterfall and Agile. And so in this Agile context, we'll dig into it a little bit further, but this would involve writing user stories, prioritizing a backlog, and using best practices from the Agile methodology. Another one, we hit this a couple times, but it's one of the most important is communication. You need to be able to plan and facilitate what your communication will be, who you're going to communicate with, schedule those meetings, sketch out what the process of communication will be, who needs to be informed when. So we'll have a whole slide dedicated just to communication. This is also your tool for gathering information and providing clarity and direction. Because without the business analyst, there are significant gaps in the company where the business has a vision and an idea, and the technical team doesn't really build what the business intended or expected. Next one, requirements and definition. This is a little bit more of a hard skill. This is something that you can build and develop, and so you want to be effective at eliciting requirements, and that would mean maybe the business stakeholder doesn't even know exactly what they want yet. They have an idea, and so this would be asking the right questions to understand the why behind the why, or understand what will really meet the need, not just what at face value the business or the stakeholder thought they wanted. Obviously, documentation is involved in this, writing good acceptance criteria so that it's testable. And you would want to have both functional and technical information defined. Stakeholder management is kind of an art. This is in the communication category, but you want to understand the needs, set expectations, and gain alignment and buy-in. The stakeholders are, in a sense, your customer, and so you want to keep them happy and provide good customer service. And so you also want to make sure that while you're delivering what they're asking for, you also need to bring them along with the solution that's been defined. Because as a middleman between business and technology, the IT teams may advise that there's a certain thing that needs to be done first, or there's a certain way we need to build the solution. And so communicating in a way that can effectively get the buy-in and support of those stakeholders will help everyone move forward and get to an agreeable solution. And the last one, most business analyst roles have an opportunity for some sort of process optimization. It could be your own process as a BA, which you want to continue to review. But most successful BAs are going to be process-minded. They'll be following a consistent process to ensure that they are effective and consistent in the work that they deliver. And with that, they'll also help the processes around them be improved. So this would involve, could be a data process or the way a process works with a system. Processes also can be in the UX space. What is the process that your users follow? And it could be actually the value or the revenue that the business brings, since maybe in a manufacturing context, there's opportunity for improving the manufacturing process for that company. So diving a little bit deeper into Agile, there are 4 Agile values. I won't walk through all these in detail, but this is a resource. If you haven't been to agilealliance.org, I do recommend it. It's just a good overview of what's here. But basically, Agile, we want to move away from that waterfall context where we try to define everything up front. It can be unrealistic to do. It's very difficult, if not impossible, proven by time, to know everything, all the unknowns of a solution up front. And so Agile aims to be more realistic and says, I don't know what it's going to take to build that thing you're talking about, the major idea, but I can break off a little piece of it and I can define what it's going to take to build this thing now, this user story. And then we will deliver it and get feedback quickly and then reprioritize and work on the next thing. All right, so as I said, communication is certainly important. Some of the goals of communication is thinking about your audience. So to effectively communicate, you want to communicate the right information to the right people at the right time and in the right way. A couple different types of communication: verbal. When you have a small audience, it can just be a conversation, and that would be two-way. If you have a larger audience, presentation is another form of verbal communication. And then mail and email, these are the slowest form of communication. This would typically be reserved for non-urgent information. So if you need to compile, get a bit of information, you don't need to respond immediately, then that can help for asynchronous work. you get your thoughts out, and it's all right if you don't hear back for a couple days, and give someone else time to reply on their own time. Chat and text, typically this should be reserved for more urgent items that you need a response pretty quickly. There's no hard and fast rule on expected response times from mail and email versus chat and text, but I can tell you from experience in multiple contexts that oftentimes email is expected to be responded to in 48 hours, sometimes 24, and chat is expected to be responded probably closer to an hour. Maybe you're in a meeting and you can't reply right away, but typically if someone sends you a chat message, they're not intending to get a response next week. They're intending to get a response now. Some other mediums that we may communicate through: web pages, social media, videos and images, and infographics. And I'll pause on that one. Infographics are a great way to communicate a lot of information visually in maybe just one page. And so it's usually a good way to condense information for quick consumption. Charts and graphs also help with that, and then diagrams. Okay, so here's some best practices of communication. The 8 C's of communication. First one is we want to be connected. And so this involves connecting with our audience. We want to establish relationships and build trust. And we want to be thinking about when we're talking to anyone, whether it's in a meeting or in a one-on-one setting, what are their preferences? It might be that they have a communication preference, such as they want you to be direct, or they want you to be more soft and indirect and let them come to their own conclusions. This might be that someone prefers to receive email and someone else prefers chat. And then we want to also be connected to their needs and their goals. If it's someone on your team, their goals are likely pretty well aligned with yours. If it's someone that's in a different department and they're tasked with something entirely different, or maybe even someone in a different company that your company is working with, their goals are different. And so you want to keep their goals in mind and ensure that you're aware of that as you communicate. Some things to avoid in the connected sense: we don't want to be distracted or disrespectful, and we don't want to be distant or silent or aloof in a meeting. And I see this one a lot. You don't want to be prideful or dominate the conversation. You want to leave room for people to talk and leave room to acknowledge when you're wrong and be open to other people's input. So cognizant, we want to use appropriate styles, tone, and channels. This also goes back to the communication methods that we talked about. And tone, if you think about how professional you need to be, it depends somewhat on the person and their preferences and their personality. It also depends on their level or their rank relative to you. If it is your peer, then it might be a more casual tone. If it is someone that you report to or even their supervisor or higher, you want to be very professional. Another thing that can be helpful is using alternate mediums and providing visuals. Not everyone takes in information in the same way. We've heard of people being a visual learner. And so considering that, you want to provide other ways to communicate the same ideas or support your point when possible. So another way, something to watch out for regarding being cognizant, is you don't want to discuss sensitive topics via chat or email. If it's something personal in nature, then you can't read people's facial expressions or tone or how what you said has affected them if it's in chat or email. And also, if you're writing something that is more sensitive, then it could potentially get in the wrong hands. So it's better if you're in person and you're in a controlled and protected space if you need to share sensitive information. And this one, a lot of people have seen memes about this and different things. It is very true that sometimes there's a high meeting culture. And so you want to be careful when you're setting up a meeting that you have a purpose and there's actually a need for that meeting to happen. If it's just some quick information that you could have provided an update, and you could send an email instead of taking people's time in the meeting, then definitely send an email instead. We also want to be careful in our communication, so sharing appropriate and accurate information. And this goes back to considering your audience. And on the flip side of that, we don't want to be providing false information. And if you are privy to some information that is available to you, but not everyone yet, then you want to make sure that you don't share that at the wrong time. We want to be contextual with what we communicate. And this was actually a growing area for me personally. I used to do this one, jump straight into complex topics and questions, because as a BA early on, I was always at the detailed level, working on the solution, talking to developers all day, understanding what needed to be built technically and what the challenges were. And I had to learn over time that if I'm sitting in a meeting with business stakeholders that may not be as connected to the problem or the solution I'm working on as I am, then I need to back up and give them a high level overview of what we're talking about, why we're talking about it, and what the meeting's about, and what I need from them. So that can help them get on the same page. And we want to connect the dots and explain the relevance of this meeting, of this solution that we're working on, how it affects them, why they're needed here. So giving people context and help them be connected. Next thing, of course, we want to be clear. We want to state our objectives and expectations. And we want to summarize decisions and next steps. When you're in a meeting, it is often unclear. We talked about a bunch of things, but no one knows what they're going to do next or when. So it's often on the BA to be the one that actually nails that down. Okay, so XYZ person, can you be the one to do this, and can you have it done by next week? That's the type of clarity that we want to bring. And are we aligned that this is the deadline, we're going to get this thing done by? And then you can send that out in the meeting notes to make sure that everyone is aligned on next step. So you don't want to assume people know what you need, and you don't want to assume people know what to do next. Curiosity goes a long way. I think that effective BAs are curious by nature. And so it can really help to prepare your questions in advance if they don't come to you naturally, if you're not so good at coming up with questions live in a brainstorming session or a requirement session, then take some time before you get in that brainstorming session to figure out what questions are relevant to it. What if a product manager comes to me and says, I want to build this feature, to make it concrete, I want to build a new banking app, then I can probably come up with 20 questions about that without having a conversation with anyone. Who's the audience, and how should it work, and how many screens do we need, and what types of transactions are we processing, how fast does it need to process data? And that's just a few. So coming up with those, writing them in advance, and then prioritizing the ones that are most important can help facilitate that meeting. And even sharing those questions in the meeting agenda will help people come prepared. Once you ask those questions, in order to be an effective communicator, you need to listen carefully. Don't just ask the question and jot down the answer and move on. Be curious and make sure you fully understand the response. So don't talk too much, don't interrupt, and don't give unsolicited opinions. And don't assume that you know the answer or the best solution. This goes back to the pride thing as well. Humility would be this attitude that there are other people in the room that are experts and have good input. And so we want to make sure that even if you do have a good solution, don't assume that yours is the only one or the best one. Still continue to get feedback and make sure that you've got the best solution that's come from the whole group. Next, we want to be concise, share only what is necessary, and that involves necessary for the current audience, necessary at the current time, and get to the main point quickly. You don't need to give extra or redundant information, and don't be overly detailed. Share just the right amount of information that is needed. And some people are prone to go off on tangents. That's okay in a social context, and you're telling a story with friends. In a business context, staying on topic and avoiding tangents is important. And it is tempting in the business context. There's always going to be many topics that might even all be relevant, but it can be part of the discipline of the business analyst to keep us on topic and on task for the current meeting, the current objective. And that goes back to some of the agile process that we talked about. We talked about breaking off just one piece and moving forward on that. So even in a meeting, when there are 10 different questions, 10 different related topics to deliver this project, you want to break off just one of those and actually get to done, get it solved, and then move on to the next one. Last thing in the communication topic would be being consistent. So this involves being timely, proactive, and following up as needed. And be sure to proofread your work and stay organized. So self-organization, time management, these are things that are necessary and basically prerequisites for a BA. There is some opportunity to learn and grow in the role, but the BA needs to be organized for themselves because they're not only responsible to be an organized team member, but they're responsible to bring organization to the team. In meetings, we want to keep a balance of our communication and outside of meetings too. Our amount of communication going in or coming out to our stakeholders or anyone we're working with. You don't want to be detached and not say anything, and you don't want to be on the other end saying way too much. And of course, don't ignore messages or overlook deadlines. It can actually be easy to do, and there's a lot of different things coming at you. So this goes back to being organized. Flag your email, set a reminder, have a process, have a part of your day where you actually go and follow up on old emails or on chats you may have missed or tasks that you committed to in prior meetings. So stay organized. On the topic of communication, does anyone have a time they can think of where they might have made some of these mistakes, or that they maybe share an example of how you've improved and communicated effectively? We can skip ahead if needed. I'm happy to just keep presenting, but as business analysts, the role involves a lot of two-way communication, and so I'm happy to have this be a little bit collaborative, and you can practice just sharing and jumping in a little bit.
Yes, so I'm suggesting that question over and think of a time that communication was important. I guess we can come back around to it later on.
Okay.
Thank you.
One last note on the communication subject. We want to avoid using slang or colloquialisms. To communicate effectively, it's best to avoid sarcasm, anything that could be misunderstood, any terms that may not be understood by everyone, especially if you work in an international context. So just keep it straightforward and clear for everyone. All right. Requirements gathering, core skill of a business analyst. It looks different in Waterfall and Agile. In Agile, it's going to be more of this continuous collaboration where you do just a piece of the requirements, you build one user story, and then you prioritize that in the backlog. Those get planned into a sprint, and then you get feedback on that quickly. In the Waterfall methodology, this tends to be a phase more all up front. So you're going to have a formal period of time that you're gathering all the requirements. In my experience, this is stressful because if you miss something, it's going to be back on you as the BA if a requirement got missed. And so you want to make sure that you're very thorough, document everything, do everything you need to the best of your ability to capture everything that will be needed for the solution. And that's why there's a whole analysis phase. You do your documentation of that, You review that, get feedback on it, and it's very formalized, and then you get sign off, and then you're able to actually move into the development. And you see here, it's once approved, requirements are considered frozen for the rest of the development process. And this is because in that waterfall methodology, it's very strict. We're intending to get to a specific time and budget. And so if requirements are continuing to change, then we can no longer commit to that time and that budget that we initially scoped out. Okay. Stakeholder management. So there are kind of soft skills and hard skills within this, but clear communication is a soft skill that can be developed through practice and self-reflection. You want to build relationships. After all, it's people that we're working with, and so it goes a long way to have a real relationship with them. Negotiation is also a soft skill in this area, so we want to find compromises. We don't want to be black and white, and we want to find the best solution that's mutually agreeable. And we want to be flexible. So we can adapt to changes even if we thought we had agreed on something. If someone comes and says there's new information, I changed my mind, something's different, then we want to be providing good customer service to our stakeholder or to anyone that's coming to us with that, and be flexible and easy to work with. Some of the more hard skills, stakeholder analysis is a formal process where you go through and list out who the stakeholders are, who's involved, what their needs are, what their goals are. Documentation, this will just be detailed and organized to have all of the documentation available. Problem solving, you could argue this is a soft skill or a hard skill, but tends to be more technical in nature. And so we want to effectively address the issues and come to solutions that meet those. And then time management. This is a hard skill that can be learned. And so you want to be effective at paying attention to the clock, paying attention to the deadlines that are coming up, and keeping yourself organized. Last one in the core skills for a business analyst is process optimization. Data gathering, you'll see that is similar to requirements gathering. And so this would be the first step to improve the process. You need to understand what's going on today, how the process currently works, and then identify if there are gaps, if there are problems, then what are the root causes of those, so that you have a good idea of what can be improved. Next, you need to actually list out what the process steps are, define the as-is state of the process, and if there's already a stakeholder or someone coming to you with the proposed future state, then you want to map out current state and future state and identify any gaps in the process to get there. So that's the plan for change management. Process mapping is the visual piece of process optimization. This would be using a certain tool like Visio or Lucidchart to make that process visual, and it's a quick way to get feedback and make sure everyone understands it in the same way. Process analysis and improvement. This is the phase where you actually look at the process that's been defined, look at the process that's been visualized, and find the bottleneck, find ways to improve those processes, and then let all that inform your recommendation. And once you've aligned on what your solution is, your improvement will be, then there's a whole change management piece to effectively implement that process. It's often not just a flip of a switch. We were doing the old way, now we're doing the new way. There's communication up front to set expectations. There's sometimes a gradual change where we implement a couple pieces of the new process at once, but maybe not all together. So that is the change management part. Some additional skills that we won't dive into today, but just wanted to touch on them. Depending on the role you are in as a business analyst, sometimes there's a UX focus and you're working on a lot of visual products. I worked in a title. I actually had the title of UX business analyst. It's not a common one, but my whole role was to understand and analyze the user experience for the internal users that were using a given software. Another one is product strategy. Sometimes the business analyst has a bit of a dual role where they're also functioning sort of as a product owner. And so these business analysts would be doing some market research. They would be casting vision for the product. They need to understand different personas or users, and then they are probably preparing business cases and KPIs so they're connected to the finances and the value of that product, so they can effectively prioritize what'll be built next. And then data analysis, some PA roles are very heavy on data analysis, and they need specific skills in data tools. And so these ones, I've actually seen this the most in big companies. If you look at a business analyst role at a company like Amazon, all of them will require data analysis. I've never seen one that didn't. And so if that's something you're interested in, then that's a good skill to dive deeper into. All right, so we will obviously not go into all those tools today, but this is just a list of some of the types of tools and technology that business analysts use. Yep. Was there a question? All right, so the tools that are here, we got some communication tools, product strategy. These help you with planning and road mapping and understanding your users, data analysis and visualization. Excel is the basic one, and then there are a lot of more advanced tools that help you go deeper into that data analysis. Requirements management and documentation. Jira and Azure DevOps are two that you'll see pretty common in the marketplace. There are others, but this is basically ticket management. And so you have a high level work item, and then you break it down into the work that'll actually be done by your development team. And the business analyst typically owns all the organization documentation in these tools. Process mapping, we touched on this. The tools like Microsoft Visio or Lucidchart enable you to do that process mapping. And then data management and warehousing. In these data focused roles, you may be doing things like pulling data out of a database or analyzing big data. And so that would require specialized tools like these. All right, so that's all I had for us today. We wrapped up just in time. Does anybody have any questions before we close?
Good from my end. Do you guys have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I I liked learning like the soft skill side of things. Mainly because you never realize how many colloquialisms you use when you're talking. So I thought that was a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. The VA role is both a technical skill and a soft skill. You need to have the people skills and understand kind of the softer side, the interpersonal relationships and communication and the dynamics going on among teams, and you need to have technical knowledge and problem solving and understand the solutions you're working on. All right, anybody else?
Think everyone's good with questions.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time today. I enjoyed sharing with you, and I hope you'll reach out if you have further questions on what it is to be a business analyst.
Thank you, Brad, for your time. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brad.
Good night all.